Is this going to be a fun video? I think so. There's a lot of data we're going to look at, like graphs. And if you like map games, you probably like graphs. So today we're going to be looking at the somewhat bizarre phenomenon of the possible enshittification of grand strategy games. It's no surprise to anyone that recent grand strategy releases have kind of all had a rough landing. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Paradox Development Studios and Civilization. A lot of the data did challenge what I thought was going on. And I think overall, the goal is to figure out whether the grand strategy market is succeeding or failing right now. I'm personally most interested in whether Paradox is succeeding or failing, since EU4 is like the game that I've spent the most time playing, and I made a 5-hour video reviewing it. And then I never made anything about EU5. So maybe this video will have some insight into why that's the case. Just to get started, we should probably talk about the most recent release in the grand strategy genre, which is Europa Universalis 5. It's sold as of May 2026, somewhere between 600 and 900,000 copies, which is a lot. Despite this, we're seeing that EU5 concurrent players have dropped below EU4 concurrent players on Steam. So that's a recent thing in the last couple of weeks. So if you look at this graph, you're going to see EU4 concurrent players over time. I got this from SteamDB, and this is EU5 right here. So big spike when it released and then dropping off. And if we kind of like stretch this out, we can see that it's dipped below EU4's concurrent players, right? And there's a better way of visualizing this, which is this graph here. So in this graph, I kind of zoomed in on the November 2025 and onward, and we could see right around early April, it kind of just dips below EU4. Again, EU5's in orange here. So now let's take a look at this graph where it's stacked, and then you can see something really interesting here. So this is the total player base for EU4 stacked, and then EU5 stacked on top, right? And we can see that EU4 is hovering around 20,000 players. And then now we're seeing that the total player base of both games combined is hovering right around that same level. So not only are fewer people playing EU5 compared to EU4, but the total player base has not really grown, at least according to the last year of concurrent players on Steam. So now let's compare this to EU4's launch. So we have EU5's launch. Maybe it's not doing so great. It's a relatively recent game. There have been a lot of negative reviews of large recent games. So let's compare it to EU4's launch in terms of concurrent players. So this is day 0 for both games. You can see that EU4's launch day was less than its concurrent players today, roughly, which is a good sign. That means that the player base has grown over the last 15 years or so. No surprise there. And then EU5's concurrent players, day 1, were really, really high. And then we see this tail, right? Where around this point, 180 days later, they're kind of at the same concurrent player base, right? So if we want to think about this in terms of a sequel and what the expectations of a sequel are, part of it is attracting new players to the franchise. Part of it is invigorating the existing player base, right? Just from this graph alone, it looks like EU5's not doing so well. What I think Paradox would have liked to see here is this tail, which is inevitable, right? The hype of launch is always going to have more players than later. I think they would have liked to see this tail flatten out above EU4, like notably above EU4, because this degree of difference from EU4 is not really that big. But again, I think the one that they should be most concerned about is this, where the concurrent total player base of this game has not really grown that much. I mean, this is maybe a 4,000 person growth, right? From this point here to this point here. That could be attributed just to EU4 players who were not playing EU4 anymore and now are playing EU5. Just doesn't look that great when you combine this graph with both of these concurrent players and the launch, comparing EU4 and EU5's launch. It just looks like a stagnant product overall. So let's get into reviews now. Reviews are where things start to break down. And again, we're just looking at EU5 as the most recent example. We're going to get into the market as a whole in a bit. This is EU4's review rate over time. So you can see positive reviews are in blue and negative reviews are in orange. And the first thing you can tell right off the bat is how much it's grown over the years, right? So I started playing around 2015, early 2015. So before SteamDB has review data. So we can ignore that. But basically, I started playing around here. And we can assume that number of reviews is proportional to the player base. So when I started playing here, We had some number of players. It's hard to estimate, but you know, we have many, many more times that number now. This is a really good overall review score on Steam. And then something happens over here between 2017 and 2020 that really triggers a change, right? And you can kind of see when these jumps happen, these are DLCs coming out. And then this long tail here of overall increasing dissatisfaction with the game. That brings us to today's sponsor, which is you. These videos are only made possible by your support. If you do want to support the channel, I'm working on some giant videos, so you can get your name in the credits of those and get early access to those videos and some behind the scenes stuff that I'm planning, which is going to be very exciting. Now let's look at EU5's reviews. So on launch and in the first couple days, very low negative review ratio overall, not too bad. And then to today, I mean, it's just unbelievably negative. If you compare these two graphs, and there's a way of measuring this a little bit more accurately, which is the percentage rate of negative reviews over time. So when the game first comes out, the negative reviews are only around 30%, and they dip, which is a good thing. Down is good, up is bad, and then they jump up again, right? And like this initial rate is kind of unreliable because there were just very few reviews. So we can comfortably say that the initial negative review rate was somewhere around 22%, which is this valley down here. And then now we're looking at, almost as 28%. So only 72% positive reviews, right? And there's going to be some worse examples later on. When you compare that with EU4's negative reviews over time, this is a different time frame, so keep that in mind. But you can see it was hovering just over 5% negative reviews. So it's at 95% 2 years after release, and then kind of hovering around there. Then something happens over here that's pretty bad, and then it kind of recovers. But it doesn't recover all the way back down to where it used to be. So something's clearly going on here. If you're Paradox, you're happy to see this go downward, but maybe you're kind of concerned about this going upward on EU5's reviews, right? So that was the example of EU5, which is the most recent grand strategy game. But what if we took all of Paradox's games and start to compare them to each other in terms of concurrent players? What are we going to see? Again, we're talking about Paradox Development Studio, not the publisher. I put together this graph, and it goes back to Victoria 2, but Victoria 2 is so tiny that we can kind of just ignore it a little bit. Similarly, I don't have Hearts of Iron 3 on here because the data was so small. So let's just look and see if we can spot anything interesting. First off, we can see Crusader Kings 2 has a very consistent player base that grew over time, right? This is Crusader Kings 2 in red down here. And we can see EU4 right around here. These two games made Paradox Development Studio. These are the games that put the studio on the map. So you can see the total player base here just growing and growing between 2012 and 2016. In 2016, we saw Stellaris and Hearts of Iron 4 come out. Stellaris is in green here and maintains like a growing player base. I think you can kind of tell that over time here. And Hearts of Iron 4 is just unbelievably massive. That's this light green. So after Hearts of Iron 4 came out, it was Imperator Rome was the next one. And that didn't do too well, but you can see it come out right here in 2019 or 18, I don't remember. And it just speckles the graph a little bit. Clearly, there weren't that many concurrent players compared to the other games. And then Crusader Kings 3 comes out in 2020. That's this light purple that you can see strewn all over this top part of the graph. And of course, Victoria 3 comes out in 2022. So after Victoria 3 came out, the next game was, of course, EU5, which is in black here. And you can see that it's kind of dropped off at the end. It's nothing we didn't already know. But basically, what I wanted to emphasize is how large the concurrent player base has become in the last 10 years. Around 2015, we have a total player base for Paradox Development Studio of about 25,000 people every day playing the game, somewhere there, maybe a little less, but I'm looking at these peaks. Today, we're at over 150,000. It's a 6x increase. So the player base has grown. It's grown insanely large, okay? I don't think we realize. I certainly didn't realize how much Paradox is audience has grown in the last 10 years. Okay. So the games that I started playing 10 years ago and the community that was there 10 years ago is like a sixth of what it is today. That's the first fact I want to point out because that fact is going to inform some of our discussion later on. So let's just quickly look at what games are currently keeping Paradox's audience around. Here's a pie chart of the aggregate players for the last 6 months, and we can see 41% of people who play a Paradox game in the last 6 months played Hearts of Iron 4, right? These are not mutually exclusive. This just is the number of players who played at least one of these, right? And man, nobody's playing your Imperator Rome. Just nobody at all. It's crazy. All right, so this is the graph I'm most excited about. This is negative reviews as a proportion of total reviews for recent Paradox games. Again, this starts in 2015 because that's when the review data came out. But EU4 and Crusader Kings 2 were already doing pretty good. This red line indicates the mostly positive value, and being above this red line means that you're mostly positive. Okay, so all these games are doing pretty good. This is above 90% positive, right? So 10% negative. And then here you see Stellaris and Hearts of Iron 4 get released, right? And they kind of travel along. And what I wanted to point out is that there was kind of a positive status quo. And then somewhere around here, remember back to the EU4 reviews, way back when, this region over here, okay, we see that region come up again here. So this is the 2017 to 2019 era. And if you were a player at the time, you'll know that this is when the DLC controversies happened. People were sick of DLCs, and there were a number of DLCs coming out, especially for EU4, that were just, let's just say they bombed. They didn't do great, okay? People were pissed about it. And so we ended up with this kind of growth in negative reviews for all their games. So even CK2, you see it spikes up here. This is across all their games from EU4, CK2, Stellaris, and Hearts of Iron 4. And notably, Hearts of Iron 4 kind of recovered from this the best, right? So they remain, even though they have such a large player base, they remain very, very positive. Imperator launched to this horribly negative reviews and kind of has recovered, but never really recovered enough. CK3 launches here exceptionally well. I guess people were really happy with CK3. I haven't played it, so I'm not going to get into it too much, but I know it was a bit controversial at the time. It's actually gone up in negative reviews since then, so people are getting more and more dissatisfied over time. And Victoria 3, more similar to Imperator, but clearly not as bad, releases to less than mostly positive reviews, but then has since just recently barely recovered, right? It's almost at mostly positive reviews at the end of this data. I haven't played all these games, so if you have, let me know what's like going on in your specific game. What's going on in Victoria 3? Why are things improving now? What's the general direction here? And then so this kind of contextualizes EU5's launch. Okay, so EU5 launches to just under mostly positive reviews. So if we look on Steam right now, we see that 73% of the reviews are positive, right? But the trend is not looking great. So this could easily dip to 69%, and then this would go away and it would become mixed for both total reviews in English. I don't know why this is by language now. When did they change that? I don't know. But we can see that recent reviews are mixed, so that trend is going downward, right? So something I want to point out here is that clearly Paradox Development Studios games are increasingly negatively reviewed, okay? I mean, like we see these long tails that kind of recover and sometimes things ebb and flow. But overall, the trend from here to here is negative, right? Negative reviews are increasing over time. And that's the second fact that I wanted to point out. So we know, number one, the player base is growing. And number two, negative reviews are also growing. So that was the second fact. Now let's look at the other major player in the grand strategy genre, which is Civilization. Okay. So I brought their data in here. Civ 5 came out in 2010, right? And saw a big spike in total players. And then when Civ 6 came out, it kind of cannibalized Civ 5 a little bit over time, but the overall total player base clearly grew, right? So we went from this many players back in 2011 to this many total players of the franchise in 2024. So this is somewhere around 80,000 concurrent players. And down here, this is somewhere around 25,000. So a 4x increase, right? Similar to Paradox. Paradox saw a 6x increase in these games. We don't have Civ 3 on here or Civ 4. So that might dampen the effect of the multiplication a little bit. But what we're seeing is clearly some growth. When we see that in this graph, when Civ 7 comes out in green here, it's kind of flat compared to before. And it hasn't been very long, but it's been over a year. It's been about a year and a half since Civ 7 came out. So we would expect some sort of growth in the player base if this game was doing well. Hey, it's me from editing. I think a point I didn't articulate clearly enough here is that these games need new players to be able to grow. The existing audience for a game kind of becomes obsolete, and new players have to come in to replace us. That's just how these games go. The audience of an existing game just aren't the right people to sell the new game to. This is counterintuitive, but if you really think about it, let's use me as an example. I spent 3,000 hours playing EU4, and my playtime really peaked roughly age 17 to 22. What are the odds that I pick up another Europa Universalis game and play that for another 3,000 hours? The odds are not that high. Like, yes, initially, a lot of the people who played EU4 are probably going to switch over to EU5. But in the long run, like all the nostalgic associations, all the familiarity of that initial game just isn't going to be there anymore. And so the likelihood that you remain a paying customer for a long period of time after playing an existing game for a long period of time just isn't that likely. I mean, at least that's what I think. I don't have the market research to really prove this, but for me, it's probably not the case that I'm going to play EU5 as much as I played EU4. I'm guessing Paradox knows this too, and that's probably why they space out their games so much between sequels. Because if you're playing EU4 already, you're probably going to buy the DLC. But if you're playing EU4, are you going to buy EU5? Are you going to really stick with EU5? Are you going to buy all the DLCs for EU5? It's just more of a risk. And at some point, they had to switch over. But I think that's why they probably delayed it as much as possible. And it's the same with Civ, right? I think the Civ games actually have done a better job at this, at least up until Civ 7, which did a terrible job. Each new game kind of captured a new market very clearly. And I think that explains really why Civ's audience has become so gigantic. It's one of the most sold games of all time now, at least as a franchise, even though it's a strategy game. And that's because they keep growing their audience every new game with new players, like fresh new players joining the space. So now we look at the rate of reviews of Civ games, and oh my God, that same 2017 to 2019 period, they saw this massive spike in negative reviews. And that's really interesting. It's really interesting that these games were, they don't look or act a lot like Paradox games, but their consumer metrics seem to do that, right? Like the way that consumers evaluate whether a game is good or not is paralleled across the whole genre. This spike was the DLC Revolt applied to Civ 6. And in Civ 7 here, oh my God, they're above 50% negative reviews, and they're not going to go down anytime soon. So I actually lied earlier when I said that I was most excited about the last graph, because this is the graph I'm really most excited about, which is review score rates across the whole industry, including the Civ games and the Paradox games. So it's the same Paradox graph you saw before with the Civ games slapped on top. And we can see Civ 6's launch just perfectly paralleling the Paradox games in terms of negative reviews. And we can also see Civ 7 is just a complete outlier of negativity along with Imperator. But Civ 7, in terms of just energy and resources that went into it compared to Imperator, is a much more significant failure. This thick red line is the aggregate negative review rate of all these games combined. And despite this jump in 2017 to 2019 kind of tapering off in the 2020s, the overall trend is growing. Negative reviews are growing over time. And if we were looking over here, it would still be growing. Despite recovering from this kind of excessive boost in negative reviews, overall, the picture is not looking great for these games, okay? So why is this happening? I mean, we know for a fact that the player base has grown over the last 10 years, but is currently stagnating, at least in recent launches. We know for a fact that the average review score of the most recent games has been increasingly negative. So how do we explain this overall trend? of stagnating player counts and negative review scores growing over time. The first idea I think I have is audience entropy. These audiences have grown over time from dedicated small fan bases looking for very specific experiences to now gigantic player bases expecting a wider variety of things just by virtue of them being so large. So back in 2015, to take EU4 as an example, people had disagreements about what to do in the game, but there was an overall understanding of the general direction of the game towards strategic decision making. People tended to play in a more aggressive way. There wasn't as much emphasis on playing tall. There wasn't as much emphasis on role play. Things like that had not fully developed the way they are today. Today, the Europa Universalis community is like a war zone of competing interests. And I'm no different. I have my own perspective on what the games should be for me because of what I get out of them. The problem is that these games are like giant sandboxes, and the fun you get out of a sandbox is kind of up to you. So everyone has their own unique perspective of this much flavor, this much simulation, this much role play, this much historical accuracy, right? And we all have completely different perspectives on these things. And I think that, coupled with the general trend of stratifying opinions over time, where people are in these echo chambers and people are online yelling at each other, and just the general phenomenon is that people are more divided even within these communities. Okay, we talk about this politically all the time, but what about in games? It's crazy to even bring this up, but people are more divided than ever in the EU4. People are more divided than ever in the Europa Universalis community. It's just a fact. And players don't, they don't want the same things as each other. And developers don't know what to do. So that's the first problem, as I see it, is that we all have different expectations, and that those expectations have diverged over time about what these games mean to us. The second thing is that the games are growing in scope. Each of these releases, there's a kind of general expectation that they're going to be bigger and better every time. And that might just not be sustainable for these companies anymore. How many buggy launches have we had, or broken launches or imperators? People are sick of that, not only because the quality is decreased, but also because the expectation of the scope increasing isn't being met. Personally, it's very tempting to want increased scope, but I think that what we're seeing from these companies is that they're unable to keep up with the demand for increased scope. And so maybe scope needs to be dialed back in some way, or at least reorganized, right? EU5 has a longer total number of years in it, right, than EU4. But at the same time, you have fewer start dates. This is like a trade-off that has to happen. Or people are complaining about the late game content. Civ 7 has better graphics or whatever, or they tried to create more content. They viewed appeal as really important in their aesthetics. And I think they overextended themselves in some way, right? And now people are really disappointed in not only the UI and the aesthetics, but also the content of the game, and they feel like it's inadequate. And so that brings us to the most important factor here, is that all of these games rely heavily on DLCs. They rely on DLCs for revenue over time, but they also rely on DLCs to provide additional content and depth to these games. I'm not going to have the DLC debate right now. I've done it a couple times, and my opinions are known if you really want to know them. But I think what the DLC controversy is creating is a sense that the cost of these games is increasing, okay, while the quality is decreasing. That's how consumers feel. So when they see these games come out and they're a little bit more broken, a little bit more buggy, and they know that the DLCs are going to come and they're going to be asked for even more money, and the current product is already not where they wanted it to be, and the audiences have diverged so much that nobody agrees on what the game even is, of course reviews are going to go down. So what should these companies do? I don't know. I'm not a game developer. But the biggest problem here, and the most solvable problem, is probably scope. Limiting scope, creating more focused experiences. That seems to be more successful in the industry right now. You see indie games doing really well. AAA games keep failing. The biggest difference between these two is scope. The challenge that strategy games have in particular is that they're always going to be weighed against their predecessor. Okay, so there's a sense in which they always should have a bigger scope than their last game in the franchise. And I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't know if that's possible anymore. I'm not a game developer. I've tinkered with it, but I don't really understand at a professional level what's going on here. But I can tell you that if the perceived cost of games and the perceived quality of games are moving in different directions, that's not great.